What's up, guys? Let's take a look at another CodeWars exercise. This one's called Text Align Justify. They're going to give us a big string of text with no formatting, but we're going to make it look nice like this example. So if you imagine a column in a newspaper, they adjust the spacing a little bit to fit everything to that column. They don't want big empty chunks at the end of a line, because then your eye interprets it as ugly and zigzaggy instead of nice and solid. So for example, these words don't quite fit if we use single spacing and we throw in maybe 2 instead of 1 sometimes to even them out. This is not drastically changing. It never goes from like 4 spaces after one word to 1 after the next. They have a rule that it can only differ by 1, so this is like 2, 2, 2, 1. And they don't go too extreme, right? You won't have like 2 words with a zillion spaces in the middle unless you really have to and there's no other choice. So I could imagine doing this by hand, right? If this was 100 years ago and you were a newspaper man moving little blocks around for the printing press, I think they're called mats, the little blocks they work with. But of course we can have a computer figure it out. And this is what Microsoft Word does all the time. And this is what people complain about whenever you put an image in your Word doc and everything freaks out and goes all over the place. So let's give it a shot. I'm going to do my version that I thought of yesterday with nothing too fancy, not a beautiful one-line code or anything, just taking it one step at a time. So what I think I'm going to do is separate how to do a single line versus how to organize the overall structure. I'm going to have a little function where we give it some words and we give it the target width, and it'll space out that line 2, 2, 2, 1 or whatever those spaces were in that example. And then this main function is going to do the delegation of that to say, hey, this line, you're going to have these 3 words, and then it'll send it on to that other function to do the job. Now we could do it all in one, but it would be indenting, 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 if, while, for. Extremely hard to read. So let's take a look at the big picture here. What I'm going to do is use some buffer where I say, okay, let's hold on to 3 words. Are they good? I don't know. Let's look at the next one. Can we squeeze 4 in the line? Yeah, okay. Let's look at the next one. Can we squeeze 5 in the line? And so this buffer will hold on to some words that we're not sure about yet until we look at the next one and it's definitely too much, in which case we'll clear the buffer and send it on to this other function to produce a beautiful line. So when they give us the text, it's just spaced out. We have to split it up into words first, or at least that's my idea. So I'm going to say words equals text.split, and then I'm going to do backwards, because my plan is to use the pop method. When you have a list and you pop things off one at a time, it takes it off the end, so I want this to be backwards. That is definitely not the only way. We could make it an iterator and use the next function, or we could just use a for loop, or who knows what, but this is going to work for me. And then we're going to start with the buffer, which is the very first one. We're going to go words.pop. We're going to pop off the top. You could imagine like a deck of cards and you're pulling them off, which there's no need to start the buffer empty. We're just going to go ahead and take one at first. And then I'm going to have my result, which is going to hold all the lines. Once we have a nice line spaced out, we'll put it in this result. And this is not the way I usually like to do things. I usually like to make it functional, where we do it all in a list comprehension or something. But for this, it's kind of a big problem, and I am going with the more classic way to initialize something and then modify it as we go. So now I'm going to say while words. This means like while we still have words to go, while we're not all the way through this deck of cards or all the way through this stack, then we're going to keep going. And I'm going to have my word, which is like the top of the deck. Okay, words.pop, whatever we're looking at as the next one. I thought about calling it next, but there's already a built-in function called next, and I didn't want to overshadow that. Okay, so now I'm going to say if, and then we have to say, I don't know if this is going to fit, right? Like imagine we have a long word in our buffer, and we pull off another long word, and it's too big. We have a thin column in this newspaper, and it can't hold two huge words. Well, I have to say, save it for next time, buddy. We're going to use the current buffer and not this. Other times we pull off a word, and yeah, it fits just fine. So we have to do a little, peek at the next one, and that's what the word is. So I'm going to say the worst case scenario, or the best case scenario, is if they just have a single space, which is like they're not going to be stretched out as much and they're not going to take up this whole width. So I'm going to go, if they all had a single space, which is like the buffer and the word, and that was greater than width, then we're definitely not able to use this next word. Like I've got 3 in my buffer and the 4th one would be too much, then we have to clear the buffer and put this current word that I'm holding off the stack into the next round. So here's where I'm going to have my other function to do a single line, and I think I'm going to call it justified join, because it's like a join, but it has the extra spacing in it. It has the potential 2 spaces or 3 instead of just 1. So I'm going to call it justified join with buffer and width. And then the buffer equals this new word. So this is the case where we didn't use the new word, where I've got 3 or 4 in there. I look at the 5th or 6th one or whatever, and then I decide that's too big. I got to clear out the current buffer and put this one that I had just peeled off the stack as the new buffer. Okay, but if that's not the case, then we just add the new guy to the buffer and then loop around and try the next one. And what that means is when we do that, we're going to go through them all except maybe the last one. Maybe we'll be left holding a word at the end, or maybe we'll have one in the buffer at the end that didn't quite fill up, but we still have to put it in the result. For example, their test case right here, they've got 1, 2, 3, space 4, 5, space 6, and then 7. So 7 is like the target width. They clear out this big chunk for the first line, and then the last line is just a little extra. So in that case, we don't need really to justify it. It's not spaced out. We don't have to put a bunch of spaces after this. It's just that character on its own. So then I'm just going to go result.append space join buffer, which is like maybe we have 2 words and we put a single space. Maybe we have 1 word and we just throw it in. But there's not any special spacing the way there was in the other ones where you had to do sometimes 2 or 3 or whatever. And then at the end, we just return these guys with the new line character. The /n means throw in a new line between them. Okay, so this is like our master plan. This is our main function, but it doesn't actually say what the justified join is, so we have to define that separately. So this is like if I gave you, let's go to the example, and of course they're using this lorem ipsum text, which is like a classic filler if you just want to show the format of your newspaper or your book layout or something. This is a boilerplate example text. They look like Latin words, but I'm pretty sure they don't actually mean anything. So if we say lorem ipsum dollar sit amet, and the width was 30, then we can't squeeze in the next word because it's a big boy. So we have to stretch out these to hit the right edge of the column, which means I'm going to have it like start out as 1111. And then we go, okay, pop in an extra here. Not quite enough. Pop in an extra here. Not quite enough. How about here? And then by the time we get here, we go, okay, that's stretched out to be happily spaced. And if it wasn't, we'd loop back to the beginning and go, okay, this one's now a 3 and a 3 and whatever. Okay, so now I'm going to make that function to do that thing. There are, I'm sure, shorter ways to do this, but it's just kind of the way I was thinking of it when I did this yesterday. So I'm going to say justified join. That's not a great name, but it fits with the idea of a join, which is in a million CodeWars exercises. You come up with your parts and then we stringify it with a space in between or something. So this is saying, hey, we're doing that, but we're just doing it with slightly different spacing. Okay, so we're going to give this function a list of words and a target width. And we have to say, first of all, if it's a single word, you're just done. Okay? If it was just one thing, well, here you go. We don't space it. We don't try to figure out the calculations. We just say, I don't know why you gave me a single word, buddy, but here, just have it back. And the only difference is we're changing it from a list to a string. We're just peeling off the container and saying, oh, you wanted a string? Well, here's a string. In fact, it might help to label the types, you know. You could say like list of str. I don't know if they let you do that. It depends on Python 3.11. It should, but I'll leave it off for now. Okay, and then I'm going to figure out how many characters we have because we need to compare it to the target width. So we can say, okay, the words on their own, well, that's like 25, so I need a bunch of spaces to hit 30 or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to say the sum of the len word for word and words. And sometimes with the comprehension like that, it's really repetitive, and I just hate saying word for word and words. So I could say map. Map says, hey, here's a function, apply it. Okay, but it's the same idea. And then we want to figure out how many spaces we have, because the non-spaces are constant. They don't change. Once we figure this out, we know that it's not going to change because these letters are going to be in the final result no matter what. And I said letters, but it also includes punctuation or other stuff too. So now I'm going to have the spaces, which does change, right? In fact, it's the only thing that could change. And the way I'm going to do it is a list of numbers. It'll be like 11110, and then we change it to 21110 and 22110, and then sort of fill in these slots left to right as we go. So I'm going to go 1 times the length of words minus 1, because the very last one is always 0. Like there's always 0 spaces after the last thing. That's what the justify means, is that it's always snug against the end of the column. Okay. And then I have this idea, like I said, of just looping through where we go, look at the first one, can we bump it up? Look at the second one, can we bump it up? And going down the line. And I'm going to do that with another while loop because I don't know how long it's going to take, right? I might get lucky and it's already spaced out just fine, or I might need to add a bunch. I don't really know, so I'm just going to use the while loop. So I'm going to go while the sum of spaces plus the non-spaces is less than width. And I'm going to throw parentheses around those, even though it's not necessary. It just looks weird. IMO without. So I'm going to say, okay, all these spaces we've got, the 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, or the 2, 1, 1, 1, 0, or whatever. Well, the sum of that plus all the nons is less than width, and that means we should add another, right? So I'm going to go spaces something plus equal 1. Well, how do we know? I'm going to have a little variable that keeps track of where we are. And sometimes when people have a variable that keeps track of where we are, they'll call it an index. Or I feel like calling it cursor. Like cursor is sort of saying, where are we? Like right now my cursor is in this spot, but next I'm in this spot, next I'm in this spot. So that's just your classic your classic index of where we are, but I just feel like calling it cursor. And then we bump it up to go to the next one. Okay? But we have to loop back around when we get to the top, so I'm going to use the modulo cursor plus 1, because I might be like here and I go to here, or here and I go to here, or here and I go back to the beginning, right? So I'm going to say mod this thing again. I'm just going to copy this thing again because I hate typing it, because that'll loop us back to the beginning. Okay, so this is saying like drop in. It's like you're playing Connect 4. You know, you drop this in, drop this in, you drop this in, and we go back to the first column again. And then I'm going to say return join. So what we're going to end up with after this thing is, like, just as an example, a list of these words, and they would have quotes, but I don't feel like doing the quotes, and then a list of numbers. So it would be like something like that. We're going to have this with 2 spaces, this with 2 spaces, this with 2 spaces, etc. And so we need to zip these. That's a classic Python function that I use all the time, is zip, when you have 2 sequences and you put them together like a zipper. So I'm going to go little f string here, and I'm going to call this words and spaces, because that's what we called them already. I don't know, maybe word isn't the right name because it could be something else like numbers, but whatever. I'm going to just say W and S, but it's not S, it's S times a space, because it might be 2 or it might be 3 or whatever. For WS in zip words and spaces. And then probably do I have the parentheses right? I don't know. Now, normally I would be testing this, right? I would hit run, see what happens, hit run, see what happens. But I'm giving you the second draft. I figured this out yesterday, and now I'm recapping it. So maybe it works, or maybe I did some typos, and we'll have to do tests anyway. That's the great thing about tests, is even if you don't plan on them, you'll mess up and need them anyway. So let's hit test for the only one example they have, and then we'll hit attempt for the many others. Oh, I put the wrong name here. So that worked for the example, but they only give one example. You really don't get serious until the big one, where they give you, 100, and some of them are super long, and some of them are kind of weird, where they like tell you 30 and then they give you a word that's exactly 30, so you got to make sure you space it out right and everything. But hey, I got it, and like I said, this is not a natural version of writing this, because when I did it yesterday I had to try things and delete them and whatever. But if I had shown you that, the video would be an hour long. So let's take a look at the solutions from other people to see how it is stylistically possible to try other approaches. Like I said, I really don't enjoy initializing stuff and then looping through them. I would rather, express it all at once in some kind of comprehension or something. So let's see if anybody was able to do it in a more declarative way. So this one is, even though it looks huge, it's kind of shorter than mine. Let's see what they did. We get the words, we get the links. Okay, that's exactly what we talked about. We start with the output. We say while there are still words left. Yeah. So even though this one looks different, it's doing very similar things to mine. And this is saying while the line still has room, we try another word. Okay, and they just have a number, like how many words, and they take a slice, whereas I had the buffer holding the words instead of just how many of them. But yeah, it looks like they're doing kind of the same thing we are, which is nice. Oh, well, there's a text wrap that automatically does some of this, so that would be helpful. And that's what you'll find in Python, is you just find stuff that already does the job. This one's pretty cool, although the names are hard to read. If you ever just see C, T, and X, it's like, what the heck does that mean? Cycle from itertools is great. It gives you, like a range or a sequence to cycle from, and then it goes back to the beginning, like I was talking about with our spaces. All right, then I'll look through these and see if there are any cool ones. It looks like they're all a little bit shorter than mine, but doing generally the same stuff. So that's nice.